My name is Harry. I'm 50 years old, well-grown man in all senses, and I was drained by 18 years old guy. And the main thing, I was straight before this moment. So, listen how it has happened and what has it become. I'll admit, I'm a little shy telling this story here, but hey, you're all strangers on the internet, right? Guess there's no harm in being real here. I don't want to waste your time, so let's just say this isn't exactly what I'd expected to be sharing at this stage in life. So, there I was one Friday night, just over it. Everything. Life had just gotten into this unbearable rhythm, you know? I wake up, go to work, come home, eat, sleep, and then repeat. And that's been my life for, what, the past 20-something years. Since the divorce 6 months back, it's felt even emptier too. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a bit lost, to be honest. It's weird starting over at this age. My kids are grown, living their lives, and here I am feeling like a stranger in my own. Anyway, that night, I decided, screw it, I need a break from my four walls. I was tired of staring at the same damn things every night. And yeah, maybe I was a bit down in the dumps too, but it was more like I was just restless. I hadn't been out to a bar in years, but I figured why not? Just to mix it up, see what's out there, have a drink, and maybe forget about the fact that I've become a middle-aged guy. I wasn't looking for anything or anyone. Hell, I didn't even think I'd end up talking to anyone, but after a few beers, the mood started loosening up a bit. And then, somewhere along the way, I looked over a few seats down, and I noticed this guy. He looked young, early 20s if I had to guess. Clean cut, but not preppy, just a bit more put together than the guys you'd usually see around there. Light blonde hair, blue eyes, a smile that was both cocky and charming, if that makes any sense. And the way he looked at me, it wasn't just a glance, he actually looked at me, you know. I could feel his eyes on me from across the bar. And then he smiled, this easy, confident kind of smile, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. Now, look, I'll admit that after a few beers, my judgment was getting fuzzy, but there was something about him. Maybe it was the way he seemed so comfortable in his own skin, or maybe it was just the fact that someone, anyone, was paying attention to me in that way. But suddenly, I didn't feel so alone at that bar. And yeah, maybe I was buzzed, but that kid looked damn handsome to me right then. Blonde hair, blue eyes, that kind of Aryan look. I know, forgive the outdated reference, blame it on my pensioner humor, I guess. So I figured, why not? I made a move. I slid down a couple of seats closer to him and introduced myself. Harry. I said, maybe a bit more confidently than I felt. He introduced himself as Craig, and right off the bat, he was easy to talk to. Younger than me by decades, but sharp and funny. He had that quick wit, and he could throw the banter right back at me. It was refreshing. Somewhere in the conversation, he just threw it out there, all casual, that I was pretty cute for an older guy. He even said, laughing, that I was a bit old for him, but he liked that. I can't remember the last time someone even remotely hinted at that. I was flattered, surprised. Hell, I didn't know what to say, but I wasn't about to ruin the vibe, so I just rolled with it. We kept talking, kept drinking, and I could feel myself getting more comfortable, opening up in ways I hadn't in a while. And then, out of nowhere, he leaned in and kissed me. Right there in the bar. Not a little peck either, he went for it. I don't think I'll ever forget that feeling. And you know, maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was the fact that I hadn't felt anything close to that in months, but something inside me just clicked. I let myself go, and I kissed him back. Right there in that bar, not caring who saw us or what anyone thought. When we finally broke away, I think we were both a bit breathless, just looking at each other. He gave me this smile, like he knew exactly what he was doing to me, and he asked, "So, how far do you live from here?" I didn't even hesitate. "Not far," I replied, half grinning and half in disbelief at what was actually happening. I must have sounded a little eager, because he just laughed and raised an eyebrow, that cocky look back on his face. Next thing I know, we're grabbing a cab together, and I'm sitting there beside him, not quite believing what I'd just gotten myself into. It was surreal. I couldn't believe this was me, sitting in a cab, heading back home with a guy, of all things. When we finally got to my place, I fumbled with my keys a bit, nerves and excitement mixing in a way I hadn't felt in years. I got the door open and we walked in, and before I could even think, Craig was on me again, right there in the doorway, kissing me hard, like he couldn't wait a second longer. And I didn't resist. I didn't even hesitate. This time, it was slower, deeper, like he was savoring it. His lips moved softly against mine, almost teasingly, but there was this intensity underneath it, like he was waiting for me to relax to let him in. And I did. I mean, how could I not? I didn't know if it was the way he held me, or the fact that he just knew. He sensed my hesitation, and he took his time, his lips moving carefully but confidently, until I could feel my nerves easing up, giving way to something stronger. I found myself melting into it, my hands coming up to hold onto him, feeling the strength in his arms, the warmth of his body pressed against mine. It was like he was guiding me, showing me how to let go, and I realized just how much I'd been holding onto over the years. And his hands, they didn't stay still for long. He moved them slowly, deliberately, his fingers trailing down my shoulders, tracing along my arms, like he was feeling every part of me, memorizing it. It was almost maddeningly slow, but somehow that only made it feel more intense. Each touch felt like it was designed to make me forget my own hesitation, to make me stop thinking and just feel. Craig's hands moved down, reaching the hem of my shirt, and I didn't stop him when he started tugging it up, letting him pull it off. I stood there, a bit bare, a bit vulnerable, but he didn't look away, didn't even hesitate. He just smiled, this small, almost reassuring smile, and it was like he knew exactly what was going through my head, like he could see the uncertainty and was telling me it was okay. Then he ran his hands over my chest, warm and steady, and I felt this spark that shot right through me. It was new, unfamiliar, but it was a good kind of unfamiliar. His touch was gentle but firm, like he wanted to take his time but wasn't afraid to push a little, and somehow that made it easier for me. It felt like he was grounding me, keeping me from overthinking, from pulling back. And when he kissed me again, he let his hands wander further, down my sides, tracing along my waist. By then, my mind was starting to lose the battle, my nerves had faded, replaced by this overpowering need to just experience it. His hands eventually found their way to my hips, where they paused, resting there for a moment before sliding down. And then, with a little more confidence than I knew I had, I leaned into him, letting his hands do the exploring. He must have sensed something shift in me because his grip tightened just a little, his hands pulling me closer until there was almost no space between us. I felt his fingers hook into the waistband of my jeans, and it was like a jolt of electricity shot through me. His touch was firm but gentle, confident but patient, like he was reading every reaction, waiting for the slightest sign that I wasn't okay. And the thing was, I was more than okay. I'd never felt anything like it, this mix of excitement and comfort, of anticipation and trust. He wasn't rough, but there was a force to his movements, a sense of purpose. He leaned in close, his lips brushing against my ear as he whispered, "I've never wanted anyone this much, especially someone like you." His voice was low, raw, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I can't lie, hearing that made something click in me. For the first time, I wasn't second-guessing myself, wasn't overthinking what was happening. I just let go. I could feel his breath warm against my neck as his lips moved down, pressing slow, heated kisses along my skin. Each one felt like it was igniting something in me, and I could feel my resistance fading, replaced by this intense, almost dizzying need to be closer to him, to feel more. Craig's hands roamed over me, his touch growing bolder, and he kept whispering things, little things that made my stomach tighten and my heart race. His fingers found their way to the waistband of my jeans again, and this time there was no hesitation as he undid the button, letting his hand slide in, guiding me closer to him. I could feel his strength, his energy, and it was exhilarating, making me forget everything else. And when he kissed me again, it was like the world disappeared. His lips were demanding, pulling every bit of focus out of me, and I found myself pressing into him, holding onto him like he was the only thing keeping me grounded. His hands moved with this controlled urgency, his fingers tracing paths that left tingles in their wake, and it felt like he was exploring every inch of me, leaving no part untouched. Craig pressed me against the wall, his hands sliding down, keeping me pinned there, and there was this fire in his eyes that I couldn't look away from. His lips brushed against mine again, but this time it was softer, slower, as if he wanted to savor it. I could feel my heart pounding, my body reacting in ways I hadn't expected, ways that made me realize just how much I'd been missing. Eventually, he went down in front of me, and I felt a surge of surprise, mixed with this intense excitement. He looked up at me, his hands resting on my hips, his eyes meeting mine with this open, vulnerable look that made my heart skip a beat. And as he moved, his touch gentle but firm, it was like everything else faded away. I'd never experienced anything like it, not even with my ex-wife. This was different, raw, intense, like he was seeing every part of me and didn't care about the imperfections. His hands held onto me, grounding me, keeping me from slipping into my own head, and I felt myself relax, my fingers threading through his hair as I leaned into the sensation, letting myself just be in that moment. There was a vulnerability to it, this deep connection that went beyond anything I'd expected. I could feel myself opening up in a way I hadn't in years, maybe ever, and it was freeing, like shedding some old part of myself that no longer fit. Craig's hands stayed steady, his touch firm and reassuring, and I could feel myself responding to him, feeling things I hadn't let myself feel in ages. By the time we pulled back, I was breathless, my heart still racing, but I wasn't thinking anymore. All the doubts, the second guessing, it was gone, replaced by this calm certainty. Craig stood, his eyes meeting mine with this understanding look, like he knew exactly what was happening inside me, and he just gave me this small, knowing smile before he pulled me in close again. But it was only the beginning. Craig pulled back just enough to look at me, his hands still framing my face. "You good?" he asked, his voice low, eyes locked on mine. I nodded, feeling this surge of something unfamiliar but thrilling trust. He didn't hesitate after that, his hands moving down over my shoulders, pressing me back against the cushions as he followed, keeping his body close to mine. I could feel every bit of him, solid and warm, and it was like a wave of heat ran through me. It wasn't just about attraction, it was about this need to be close to him, to let him take me somewhere I hadn't even realized I wanted to go. And when he moved against me, when he leaned in close and kissed me, slow and deep, it was like he was peeling back layers I hadn't even known were there. His touch was confident, yet gentle in a way that made me feel like he understood exactly what this meant for me. He took his time, his hands tracing along my arms, over my chest, moving slowly as if he was discovering me piece by piece. It was this perfect balance of intensity and care, his fingers brushing over my skin, his lips pressing softly against mine, and I could feel myself responding to him, letting myself fall into it. As things heated up, there was a moment where I felt a bit of tension, a flash of nervousness. I'd never been this close with a man before, and part of me didn't quite know what to do, didn't know how to feel. But Craig was steady, grounding me with his presence. He must have sensed it because he paused, his hand resting over my heart as he looked at me. "Hey," he said, voice soft, "you don't have to worry, just be here with me." And those words, they were exactly what I needed. I felt myself relax, letting him guide me, letting go of all the expectations and just being there in that moment. Craig's hands moved lower, sliding along my sides, his touch firm but still gentle, still giving me that space to breathe. And even as things got more intense, he never lost that focus, that understanding that this was new for me. When he leaned down, pressing soft kisses along my jaw, down my neck, I felt a shiver run through me. Each touch, each kiss felt like it was erasing any lingering doubts I had. His lips were warm against my skin, and I found myself tilting my head back, letting him explore, letting myself enjoy every sensation without holding back. I could feel my heart racing, my breath coming a bit faster, but there was no anxiety, no hesitation. Just this deep, steady pull toward him, this connection that felt stronger than anything I'd ever known. Then he pulled back just a bit, looking at me with a smile that was both reassuring and a bit mischievous, like he knew exactly what he was doing to me. Then he turned me around, and you got my point. As we moved together, there were moments of pure intensity, and then moments where things slowed, where he'd just hold me close. And even when things got a bit rougher, a bit more intense, he never lost that awareness, that understanding of where I was. His hand came up to rest on the back of my neck, his fingers threading through my hair, pulling me closer in a way that was both firm and gentle. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to mine, his breath warm against my skin, and there was a moment where we just stayed like that, close, connected, like we didn't need words to know what the other was feeling. Then, as things progressed, there was a bit of discomfort, a reminder of how unfamiliar this all was. I'd never felt anything like it, and yeah, it was a bit intense, a bit raw. But Craig was right there, his hands steady, his eyes meeting mine with that same understanding. He didn't rush, didn't push, just stayed close, his hand moving to rest on my hip, guiding me with this patience that made everything feel okay, even the parts that were new and a bit overwhelming. And somehow, through all of it, I found myself adjusting, leaning into the intensity, feeling that spark of connection grow stronger. Craig was everything I hadn't known I needed. Assertive but caring, confident but understanding. He held me close, his hand gripping my shoulder as he looked at me, and there was this raw honesty in his eyes that made me feel like he was seeing all of me, the parts I'd hidden even from myself. By the time we were done, I was exhausted, but in the best way, my body still buzzing from the intensity of it all. Craig sat beside me on the couch, his hand resting on my knee, his thumb tracing little circles as we caught our breath. He looked at me, a small smile playing on his lips, and there was this warmth in his eyes that made me feel like he'd enjoyed every moment just as much as I had. And as I sat there, looking at him, feeling the afterglow of what we'd just shared, I realized that this was more than just a night. This was a moment that had changed something inside me, something I hadn't even realized needed changing. When I woke up the next morning, there was this heavy, disoriented fog in my head. It wasn't just the usual kind of grogginess that comes from a late night, it was more than that. A mix of the whiskey I'd had the night before and, well, the shock of what had actually happened. I blinked a few times, trying to get my bearings, and that's when I felt it, the warmth beside me, the weight of someone else in my bed. I turned my head slowly, and there he was, Craig, still asleep, his blonde hair messy, his face peaceful in a way I hadn't noticed the night before. Seeing him there, in the morning light, it all came rushing back to me, the night, the bar, the way he'd made me feel things I hadn't felt in years. But as much as I'd loved every minute of it, there was this wave of anxiety that crept up as I looked at him. First, it was a strange sort of worry that hit me. Was he even old enough? In the rush and excitement of the night, I hadn't even thought about it, hadn't stopped to wonder if he was over 18. Sure, he'd been confident, mature, and he certainly didn't look like a teenager, but still. I was over 50, and the thought of having brought someone underage home, even unintentionally, sent a chill down my spine. So trying to stay calm, I glanced around for his jacket. I felt a little ridiculous, maybe even a bit guilty, but I couldn't relax until I knew for sure. I found his wallet tucked into the inside pocket, and there it was, his ID card. When I saw that he was over 19, I let out a huge breath, relief flooding through me. He was an adult, young but legal, and I hadn't done anything I'd regret. With that fear put to rest, I sat back on the edge of the bed, glancing at him again, taking it all in. And that's when it really hit me. I'd spent the night with a man, a much younger man, and not only had I enjoyed it, but I was happy about it. There was this kind of calm, a realization that I hadn't just done it for the sake of doing something wild. I'd done it because I'd wanted to, because it had felt good, right even. Craig had shown me something I hadn't known I was missing. And as I sat there, thinking about the way he'd held me, the way he'd taken control, I felt this surge of warmth, this strange but undeniable pull that made me want to reach out to him again. I took a deep breath, letting myself sit with that feeling for a moment before standing up and heading back into the bedroom. Craig was still sleeping, sprawled out on his side, his face half buried in the pillow. There was this sense of peace about him, a kind of openness that I hadn't really noticed before. Seeing him like that, I couldn't help but smile a little, feeling this warmth in my chest, this strange sense of tenderness that I hadn't felt in a long time. Carefully, I sat down on the edge of the bed, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from his face. I was a little hesitant at first, not wanting to wake him, but the feel of his hair under my fingers, soft and warm, felt reassuring somehow. I let my hand rest on his head, fingers moving gently, just enjoying the quiet moment, the closeness. And as I sat there, I realized that I wanted more. More of this feeling, more of him. Craig had shown me a side of myself I hadn't known existed, and now that I'd felt it, I didn't want to let it go. Eventually, as my hand moved from his hair down to his shoulder, Craig stirred a little, his eyes fluttering open. For a split second, he looked confused, like he was trying to remember where he was, but then he saw me, and a sleepy smile spread across his face. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like waking up beside me was the most natural thing in the world. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep, but there was a warmth in it, a kind of softness that made me feel at ease. I didn't know what to say at first, but then, without really thinking, I leaned down and kissed him softly, tenderly, letting him know just how much I'd enjoyed being with him, just how much he'd meant to me in those few hours. To my surprise, Craig responded immediately, his lips pressing back against mine, slow and gentle. It was different from the night before, more relaxed, less intense, but there was this closeness, this unspoken connection between us that felt just as strong. His hand came up to rest on my shoulder, pulling me in just a little closer, and I felt myself leaning into him, letting the warmth between us build, letting myself enjoy the moment without any reservations. When we pulled back, Craig looked up at me, his eyes bright even in the morning light, and there was this mischievous spark in them that made me smile. He didn't say anything, just looked at me with this knowing expression, like he could see right through me, like he knew exactly what I was feeling. It was comforting and unnerving all at once, but I didn't shy away. Instead, I let myself hold his gaze, letting him see just how much he'd affected me, just how grateful I was for what he'd shown me. After a moment, Craig reached out, his hand resting on mine, and he gave it a gentle squeeze. Last night was something, he said, his voice soft, but there was a depth to it, a sincerity that made my heart skip a beat. I nodded, not really trusting myself to speak, but he just smiled, his fingers brushing over the back of my hand. It was strange how natural it all felt, sitting there with him, sharing this quiet, intimate moment. There were no awkward silences, no unspoken questions, just this feeling of mutual understanding, this shared knowledge that what we'd experienced was something unique, something special. And in that moment, I knew that I wanted more than just a one-night thing, more than just a fleeting encounter. I wanted to see where this could go, to explore this side of myself that I'd only just discovered. Lying there beside him, I felt this urge building up in me, one I didn't quite recognize, but it was strong, like I just had to act on it. This wasn't about the usual morning routine. It was about something deeper, a feeling that had me completely captivated, like I wanted to give back to him for the night before. Craig had been patient, he'd taken the lead, and he'd shown me a whole new world. But this morning, I wanted to be the one to take him by surprise, to show him what this all meant to me, even if I was still figuring it out. I took a breath, steeling myself a bit before I lifted the blanket, leaning over him. Slowly, carefully, I began to press kisses along his shoulder, his chest, letting my lips explore each part of him as I moved lower. His skin was warm beneath my lips, and there was something intimate, something strangely powerful about each small kiss, each touch. I could feel Craig shifting under me, his breathing changing just slightly, and it was like I tapped into something real, something that made me want to keep going, to keep discovering. As I kissed him from top to bottom, I was learning about him, and in some unexpected way, about myself too. I felt my own nerves, my own unfamiliarity with it, but I didn't let it stop me. Instead, I focused on the way he reacted, the way his hand came up to rest on my shoulder, his fingers tightening a bit as he let me lead this time. By the time I reached where you can imagine, my heart was racing, but there was this confidence growing in me. I just went for it, following this instinct I didn't know I had, letting myself get lost in the moment. It was my first experience like this, and I'd be lying if I said I knew exactly what I was doing, but the look on his face, the way he responded, let me know I was on the right track. Carefully, I sat down on the edge of the bed, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from his face. I was a little hesitant at first, not wanting to wake him, but the feel of his hair under my fingers, soft and warm, felt reassuring somehow. I let my hand rest on his head, fingers moving gently, just enjoying the quiet moment, the closeness. And as I sat there, I realized that I wanted more. More of this feeling, more of him. Craig had shown me a side of myself I hadn't known existed, and now that I'd felt it, I didn't want to let it go. Eventually, as my hand moved from his hair down to his shoulder, Craig stirred a little, his eyes fluttering open. For a split second, he looked confused, like he was trying to remember where he was, but then he saw me, and a sleepy smile spread across his face. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like waking up beside me was the most natural thing in the world. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep, but there was a warmth in it, a kind of softness that made me feel at ease. I didn't know what to say at first, but then, without really thinking, I leaned down and kissed him softly, tenderly, letting him know just how much I'd enjoyed being with him, just how much he'd meant to me in those few hours. To my surprise, Craig responded immediately, his lips pressing back against mine, slow and gentle. It was different from the night before, more relaxed, less intense, but there was this closeness, this unspoken connection between us that felt just as strong. His hand came up to rest on my shoulder, pulling me in just a little closer, and I felt myself leaning into him, letting the warmth between us build, letting myself enjoy the moment without any reservations. When we pulled back, Craig looked up at me, his eyes bright even in the morning light, and there was this mischievous spark in them that made me smile. He didn't say anything, just looked at me with this knowing expression, like he could see right through me, like he knew exactly what I was feeling. It was comforting and unnerving all at once, but I didn't shy away. Instead, I let myself hold his gaze, letting him see just how much he'd affected me, just how grateful I was for what he'd shown me. After a moment, Craig reached out, his hand resting on mine, and he gave it a gentle squeeze. Last night was something, he said, his voice soft, but there was a depth to it, a sincerity that made my heart skip a beat. I nodded, not really trusting myself to speak, but he just smiled, his fingers brushing over the back of my hand. It was strange how natural it all felt, sitting there with him, sharing this quiet, intimate moment. There were no awkward silences, no unspoken questions, just this feeling of mutual understanding, this shared knowledge that what we'd experienced was something unique, something special. And in that moment, I knew that I wanted more than just a one-night thing, more than just a fleeting encounter. I wanted to see where this could go, to explore this side of myself that I'd only just discovered. Lying there beside him, I felt this urge building up in me, one I didn't quite recognize, but it was strong, like I just had to act on it. This wasn't about the usual morning routine. It was about something deeper, a feeling that had me completely captivated, like I wanted to give back to him for the night before. Craig had been patient, he'd taken the lead, and he'd shown me a whole new world. But this morning, I wanted to be the one to take him by surprise, to show him what this all meant to me, even if I was still figuring it out. I took a breath, steeling myself a bit before I lifted the blanket, leaning over him. Slowly, carefully, I began to press kisses along his shoulder, his chest, letting my lips explore each part of him as I moved lower. His skin was warm beneath my lips, and there was something intimate, something strangely powerful about each small kiss, each touch. I could feel Craig shifting under me, his breathing changing just slightly, and it was like I tapped into something real, something that made me want to keep going, to keep discovering. As I kissed him from top to bottom, I was learning about him, and in some unexpected way, about myself too. I felt my own nerves, my own unfamiliarity with it, but I didn't let it stop me. Instead, I focused on the way he reacted, the way his hand came up to rest on my shoulder, his fingers tightening a bit as he let me leave this time. By the time I reached where you can imagine, my heart was racing, but there was this confidence growing in me. I just went for it, following this instinct I didn't know I had, letting myself get lost in the moment. It was my first experience like this, and I'd be lying if I said I knew exactly what I was doing, but the look on his face, the way he responded, let me know I was on the right track. And judging by the way Craig's breath quickened, the way his hand gripped my shoulder a bit tighter, I think he enjoyed it. More than enjoyed it, actually. I could feel it in the way his whole body responded, the little sounds he made, the way he leaned into me, letting me know that I was doing something right. Understood. Here's the next part of Harry's story. That morning left me with a feeling I couldn't shake, a mix of exhilaration, confusion, and this strange, undeniable longing. After Craig left, I found myself replaying everything in my mind, from the night in the bar to our morning together. It was more than just physical. There was a closeness, a sort of excitement in discovering this new side of myself that had been dormant for so long. I couldn't stop thinking about him, and it didn't take long before I picked up my phone and texted him. A simple "Hey, had a great time. Would love to see you again." And to my relief, Craig responded almost instantly, saying he'd had a good time too, adding a little winking emoji that somehow made me smile like an idiot. I was nervous, I won't lie. I felt like a teenager again, unsure and excited all at once. But it was clear that he was just as into the idea of meeting up again as I was. So, over the next few weeks, we made it a bit of a routine. He'd come over to my place, usually after work or on a weekend night, and we'd just hang out, have a drink or two, talk about our days, and just let things unfold naturally. With each visit, I felt more comfortable, more at ease, and I found myself looking forward to his company in a way that surprised me. Craig was different from anyone I'd been with, young, yes, but also open-minded, direct, and he had this energy that just pulled me in. There was one night in particular that stands out. He showed up in this fitted shirt, his blonde hair a little messy, his blue eyes bright with that playful glint that I'd come to recognize. We'd barely made it past the front door before he was on me, pressing me against the wall, his hands moving with this confidence that left me breathless. I remember the way he kissed me, slow but deliberate, his hands tracing over my chest, my shoulders, making me feel like I was the only person in the world. His youth was intoxicating, this mix of strength and tenderness that I hadn't experienced in years. His touch was firm but thoughtful, like he knew exactly what he was doing, exactly how to make me lose myself. And I did. Every time, I let myself get completely caught up in the moment, forgetting everything else, just focusing on the warmth of his body against mine, the way he made me feel like I was discovering something new each time we were together. But there was one night that was different, more spontaneous. I picked him up, planning to head back to my place as usual, but halfway through the drive, Craig gave me this look, this mischievous grin that told me he had something else in mind. He leaned over, his hand resting on my thigh, and whispered that he didn't want to wait until we got back to the house. I was surprised, a bit caught off guard, but there was something exciting about the idea, something that made my pulse quicken. We found a quiet spot, a little off the main road, and parked the car under a street lamp, the soft glow giving the whole moment a surreal feeling. I turned to him, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves, but before I could say anything, Craig was already leaning in, his hand slipping around the back of my neck as he pulled me in for a kiss. It was different from our usual slow build-ups. This was urgent, almost reckless, and I found myself getting caught up in it, letting him lead the way. His hands were everywhere, exploring, pulling me closer, and I could feel his strength, his confidence in each touch. There was something thrilling about being in that confined space, feeling his body pressed up against mine, knowing that anyone could pass by and see us. It was risky, yes, but that only made it more intense, more exciting. Craig had this way of making every moment feel like an adventure, like he was introducing me to a side of myself I hadn't known existed. In that car, everything felt heightened. His touch, his closeness, the warmth of his body against mine, it was electric. He had this way of looking at me, this intensity in his eyes that made me feel seen, like he was truly focused on me, on us, and nothing else mattered. I remember the way his hands moved over me, confident and sure, like he knew exactly what he wanted and wasn't afraid to take it. It was exhilarating, letting him take the lead, letting him show me this whole new way of being with someone. It was a few weeks after that unforgettable night when things between Craig and me reached a new level. By now, we'd established this easy, comfortable rhythm. Meeting at my place, a bit of banter over a drink or two, letting the night unfold naturally. But this time, I felt something different, a desire to take a bit more control, to be the one leading things for a change. As I settled over him, Craig looked up at me, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth, like he was both surprised and excited to see the side of me. I leaned down, kissing his back deeply, and felt him relax into it, letting me guide him, letting me set the pace. I felt this rush of adrenaline, this incredible feeling of being in control, of being the one to lead us both into something new. And now I was on top of the man. For the first time in my life, it was intense, this mix of confidence and excitement, and I could tell from the way Craig responded that he was as into it as I was. With each movement, each shift of my body over his, I felt like I was learning, discovering this whole new way of connecting with him. I guess I'd thought everything was perfect between us. In hindsight, maybe that sounds naive, but it's how I felt. We never had the "what are we?" talk, never put labels on anything. We didn't discuss commitment, loyalty, or exclusivity, but somehow I just felt it was there. He was different from anyone I'd been with before, you know. He was a breath of fresh air in my life, something I didn't realize I'd been missing until I met him. I was already falling for him, this young stallion, and in the back of my mind, I thought he might be feeling the same. Funny thing is, I just finalized my divorce from Darla not too long before meeting him. Darla and I were together for a long time, but the last few years it was just dead. We had grown apart, living side by side like polite strangers. We'd make plans, but they were empty plans. We'd eat meals, but they were silent. So when it finally ended, I didn't feel the heartbreak I thought I would. It was relief more than anything. Still, I told myself I wouldn't jump into anything serious for a while. I was just going to live for me for a bit. But then I met Craig, and he just blew all those good intentions right out of the water. The more time I spent with him, the more my feelings grew, and at some point, I wasn't just seeing Craig. I was falling for him hard. I'd catch myself daydreaming about him, looking forward to his texts, and smiling at the stupidest things he'd say. Darla barely crossed my mind, and I thought, wow, this is it. This is what it's supposed to feel like. I started assuming there was an unspoken bond between us, something that didn't need to be said out loud. It felt so right that I thought he must feel it too. But one day, things started to change. It was subtle at first. I noticed he wasn't responding as quickly to my messages, and when he did, his replies felt a little distant, a little less enthusiastic. I'd ask if he wanted to hang out, and he'd say he was busy or that he'd let me know, but then he wouldn't follow up. I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was going through something or just needed space. But as the days went by, that distance grew. We stopped seeing each other altogether, and every unanswered text felt like a brick adding to this wall between us. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I mean, we'd never had the talk, never put labels on anything, right? But still it hurt. I missed him more than I wanted to admit, and I started questioning everything. Was it something I did? Did I say something that pushed him away? I wanted answers, but I didn't want to seem desperate or needy, so I waited, hoping he'd reach out, but he didn't. One night, I was driving around the city just trying to clear my head. I didn't have any destination in mind. I was just aimlessly circling the streets we used to walk together, going through the motions and trying to shake off the growing feeling of disappointment. I wanted to see him, hear his voice, even if it was just for a minute. I kept thinking, maybe I'll bump into him somewhere, by chance. Silly, right? But then I saw him. I was at a stoplight, and there he was just across the street. I hadn't seen him in weeks, so I could hardly believe it was actually him. But there was no mistaking that familiar walk, the way he held himself, that easy smile on his face. I felt my heart jump, part excitement, part relief. I thought, maybe this is the sign I've been waiting for, maybe things will turn around. And then I saw him reach out, taking another guy's hand. They stopped and shared this kiss, just standing there, completely oblivious to the world around them. I watched them talk, saw them laughing and smiling, and it was like someone punched me in the gut. All I could think was, that used to be me. I sat there, staring, trying to process what I was seeing, but my mind was blank. The light changed, and cars behind me started honking, so I had to drive on, but the image of them stayed with me. I felt stupid. Really, really stupid. Here I was, going around in circles, waiting for a text, hoping for some explanation, thinking he'd eventually come back. Meanwhile, he'd clearly moved on, maybe even had someone else the entire time. I started second-guessing everything, wondering if any of it had been real, or if I'd just made it all up in my head. After that, I couldn't bring myself to reach out to him. It felt pointless. I knew what I saw, and there was no coming back from it. So I tried to move on, get back to my own life, tell myself it was just a short-lived fling, nothing more. But it stung in a way I hadn't expected. I couldn't just shake it off. Looking back, I think I was foolish to set up these expectations in my head. Loyalty, commitment, those were things I'd taken for granted, assumed they'd come naturally. But with Craig, I don't know. He was young, and in his world, maybe things didn't work that way. He wasn't mine to begin with. I told myself that over and over, hoping it would make me feel better, but it didn't. In the end, it just felt like an excuse, something to help me justify why he'd left. It's been half a year since then, and I haven't heard from him. Not a text, not a call. And I haven't reached out either. Maybe I should have, but what would I even say? Hey, I saw you with someone else, and it hurt. I don't want to put that on him. So I just kept quiet, kept to myself, tried to let the whole thing fade into the background. The funny part is, even now, after all this time, I still think about him sometimes. I still find myself wondering what he's up to, if he's happy, if he ever thinks about me. It's a weird feeling, like being caught in this space between missing him and resenting him. I know he's young, and young people do that. They meet people, have fun, and then they move on. I was just another chapter in his story, nothing more. Maybe that's all it was ever supposed to be. So here I am, single again, back to square one. I guess it's not all bad. It was an interesting experience, if nothing else. A story of closeness, of feeling connected for a little while. It taught me a lot about myself, about what I want and what I don't. I'm not bitter, not really. I just wish I'd known sooner that it was only temporary. Life goes on though, I'll be alright. But every once in a while, I still catch myself looking for him in a crowd, half hoping to see that smile again. In the end, what's come out of all this is something I didn't expect. A new understanding of myself. A side of me I'd buried, ignored, or maybe just didn't even know existed. This whole thing with Craig brought me face to face with a part of myself I used to be afraid of. Intimacy with men. Not just attraction, but the whole experience of it. Opening up, being vulnerable, putting my heart on the line with another man. For years, I kept this part of me locked away, hidden under layers of routine, obligations, and my marriage with Darla. I guess I thought I'd missed my chance to explore it, or that maybe I was just too set in my ways. But Craig showed me that there's so much more to life, more than I realized. He made me feel things I hadn't felt in a long time, feelings I thought were buried for good. And even if things didn't work out, I can't regret the time I spent with him because it taught me so much. It showed me that it's okay to feel this way, that it's okay to want this kind of connection. But I also learned something else from all this, that maybe I need to be more realistic in what I'm looking for. Craig was this whirlwind, this energetic young guy, and I couldn't keep up with him, not really. His life was on fast forward, constantly moving, and in the end, I realized that I just can't play by those same rules. He's young, free, and discovering the world at a pace that doesn't match where I'm at in life. And I don't hold it against him for a second. That's exactly where he should be. But for me, I need something different, someone who can move at my speed. So going forward, I think I'll stick to my age group. I want someone who understands the rhythm of life I'm in now. I'm done with the chase, with trying to keep up with the rush of someone else's world. What I want is something steady, someone who values the kind of connection that comes with time, with shared experiences and a deeper kind of closeness. I want someone who's ready to be present, who's looking for something more lasting.